Hello guys and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's session we're gonna look into Copilot Studio tools, or also former known actions. We're gonna see how you can add tools to your Copilot and how you can refine them to basically use those tools correctly, fill in the inputs correctly, and basically respond to the user with an answer in the way you want him to respond. There are a number of parameters which you can basically set up yourselves. We're going to use an existing Power Automate flow, and we're going to use an API for Ticketmaster. So our example will be we're going to find events within the Netherlands for a certain time frame. So let's jump into that and let's check out how you can build your tools and actions within Copilot Studio. Here we have our existing Copilot. So our Copilot has an instruction with assisting users in finding events in the Netherlands based on provided start, end date, and city. It basically needs to ensure that the information is accurate and up to date, respond in a friendly and helpful manner, do not provide information outside the scope of the events in the Netherlands, and if the user provides incomplete information, it should ask for the missing details. So that is what we have on the Copilot Studio side. Besides that, we're going to use a Power Automate flow, which will act as our tool, which looks as the following. We have a skill, which is the input for a Copilot, which is being used to trigger that flow, where we have city as an input, an end date, and a start date. Then we have a HTTP call. So an HTTP call is basically to trigger an API to an outside system. In that sense, it's using a get method, so it's retrieving information, and it's doing a call to a certain endpoint. And here we are using query parameters. So query parameters you need to see as basically parameters which are used to query the information. So in that case, we're going to provide the city, which could be Amsterdam, a start date, which could be the 10th of June, and an end date, which could be the 15th of June, for example. So what it will do then is, and it will check, okay, which events are between the 10th and 15th of June within Amsterdam, and it's going to respond that data to us. And what we're going to do is we're going to just take that response and give it back to Copilot. Next step, we can go to Copilot Studio. And here we are going to the tools section and we're going to click on add a tool. So tool is basically the former known actions. And a tool can be many things. It can be a prompt, it can be a Power Automate flow, it can be a standalone connector, or it can also be an MCP server, for example. But for this example, we're going to go ahead with a Power Automate flow, which we just have seen. So therefore, we're clicking here on flows, and we're going to select the flow which we just discussed. And now it's being added as a tool. So you're going to see up here the name, you're going to see the inputs and the outputs, and we can add the tool as is. Once we have added the tool, we now have the possibility to configure the tool, how to, for example, fill the inputs, and also when it should be used from the agent. Therefore, let's just test our action without configuring anything. For example, what events are happening this weekend in Amsterdam? What we see now here is basically running into an error. We can see in the middle the activity app, so we know, okay, it triggered the correct action. In that case, our Power Automate flow fills, for example, the start date, it fills with Amsterdam currently, it fills the city string with the date, and it fills also the end date with a date. So obviously an API is not supporting a date in the city, neither does it support Amsterdam, the city name, in our city input. So that's why we need to make sure that we are configuring the inputs correctly, and we basically tell the AI which data it should fill into which specific field. Therefore, let's fix the input for our tools. We can go back to the tools section here, and we can select the tool which we want to change. So we can see that all of these three inputs are currently filled with dynamically from AI. However, on the right here, we have the possibility to customize those input fields. So let's just click on that. And there are two things which are very important. The first one is the description, which basically defines what should be filled into that field. And as you can see, it's just showing, please enter your input currently. So we can say here, this is the location of an event. And secondly, we have also identify as. So an identify as is looking into entities into Copilot Studio. So therefore, there is a number of pre-created entities, and one of them is city. So we can just select city here, and there's a pattern defined in the background how AI should identify a city. So therefore, we can select city for this specific input field. Besides that, we have the start date and the end date. So let's customize those as well. And there's one specific detail to know here. The start date and the end date is very often required in a specific format. So you need to know the format which needs to be provided to that specific input field. So we give here the description, which is, this is the start date of an event, and it must be provided in the following format. And then we are basically using this format here. So we have the 15th June 2025, and it's also providing a timestamp. That is per API different, but in this case, this is the format which needs to be provided, which most of the times you can find in an API documentation. So the same we can also do now for the end date. Let's customize this as well. And copy this. We're going to fill it here in the Customize tab. We're going to say, this is the end date of an event. And then we can hit save. So these are all the minimum steps which you should do that your input fields are filled correctly from AI. So AI also knows what it needs to fill in, what this field is used for, so it can fill it correctly. Now that we have defined our input types, we can just try reprompt and see how it's happening this time to that specific input fields. So we can see this time Amsterdam is filled correctly into the string input field. However, it cannot determine currently start date and end date. It is basically asking you to provide it in that format, which is not really common, and we cannot expect a user to do that. So therefore, we can enhance our system prompt of the action so it can define and use dates on its own. Therefore, we are going back into tools, to our tool which we have, and we can give a description here. So currently you can see it's empty. So this description is used to define when dynamic chaining should pick it up. So dynamic chaining is basically AI using tools when it thinks it will profit the user to answer his specific prompt. So that is what's happening in the background. We are not saying call this API currently. AI just decides, okay, to facilitate this request, I need to call this Power Automate flow and get a response, and then I can work further with that. So therefore, we need to describe this action more specifically so it knows what it is supposed to do and how it should be used. Therefore, we just enter a description here. For example, retrieve live, scheduled, and upcoming event data. For example, concerts, sports theater, by location, date, or keyword. So the more detailed you get with your model description, the better your outcomes will be. So therefore, let's save that. And we're gonna re-execute this specific prompt. Now that it's saved, we can refresh our Copilot. and we can re-ask this specific prompt. From this example, we can see now that it's not even filling the date, even though we specified tool description. What we can do from now are two things. We can assume that Copilot is not able to retrieve the date, so it doesn't know which date it is today. Or we can basically modify the system prompt to also identify a date. So therefore, we are going back to our overview and we are going to our general instructions. So we can see there's currently not much on a date handling besides that it's being provided with a start date. So therefore, let's add in the description here identified date from a user. And then we provide an example. Someone is asking for next weekend. Fill out the dates for the weekend. And let's click save. Now that our new system prompt was saved, and just test another prompt here again. Say, for example, what events are happening next weekend in Amsterdam? We can see that this time it's actually filling out the start time and the end date, and we are getting a response in here. Click on that. That's basically the whole response which it gets back from the API, the large JSON. We don't have to say anything that it should, for example, take only certain information. It's using artificial intelligence now to basically take that response and make a useful answer for the user out of that. The user will see only here some events happening next week in Amsterdam. Encore is happening on the 14th of June. There's 10th of June. Actually, Pitbull is coming into the Ziggo Dome, and it's getting all that information just out of this huge payload. And those are basically the effective ways how you can use actions in your Copilot and how you can make sure that the actions of the tools are used correctly from Copilot. So by refining your system prompts, defining the description of the tool, and to refine also the inputs which are going into the flow. So that was how you can basically define your tools within Copilot Studio so they will be used efficiently and correctly. In our next YouTube video, we're going to dive deeper into how you can use outputs and how you can refine them and how you can even take better a human in the loop by asking for approval by using certain actions and to also recheck the data which is going into your flow. But for now, that's it from this video. I hope you liked it. Give the video a thumbs up and I see you in the next one.